Hello, everybody. My name's Ivano Labricciosa. I'm the president and CEO of Oshawa Power, and I have the great privilege today of hosting a podcast with Cara Clairman of Plug and Drive, the president and CEO of Plug and Drive. And a little fact here: I knew Cara from years ago when we started talking about Plug and Drive, and here we are, like a dozen years later, and it's vibrant and running very strong. So, Cara, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, Cara, a couple of questions about Plug and Drive and the
Sure.
electric vehicle adoption and the things that are happening out there. This is a great time for your organization. In your time with Plug and Drive, how have consumers sort of shifted their understanding of EVs and what are they looking for in terms of more information?
Sure. Well, when we first got started, as you pointed out, almost 12 years ago, we did get a lot of blank stares because most people had actually never heard of an electric car. And if they had this idea that maybe it was more like a golf cart. It was prior to Tesla, right? So they didn't even really have that in their mind. It was more these low speed vehicles. That's what people had in their mind. And then when Tesla came out, then they thought, oh, electric cars, those are really expensive. And actually, we still find that to this day that people have that notion that EVs are too expensive. But now with more than 50 makes and models available in Canada, we are sort of, no more are we worrying about like, oh, there isn't one that I like, or I'm waiting for the SUV, pickup trucks, all coming. So I think, this issue of makes and models is finally going away, but that was really a huge concern for a long time. And then of course, concerns about range have been an ongoing concern, thankfully also going away because the range of the new vehicles is so amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's been shifting over time. Again, we've started this file years and years ago, and I'm so glad you picked up the mantra to run with Plug and Drive. And I see the logo in behind you. I remember the original logo we were tossing around. It's come a long way itself as well. It's evolved. But your point is well taken in that the earliest Prius, for example, right? Do you remember those days? And then the Leaf and certainly Tesla was a game changer. But now 50 models, that's huge.
It's incredible. And you know what, Ivano, around this time next year, maybe 16, 18 months from now, we'll have more than 100 makes and models available in Canada. So this issue of make and model is going away. Of course, finding these is a little challenging right now. And, you got to wait a little bit and you got to order it. But we are going to see better days ahead.
Oh, that's great. And it's wonderful to see the adoption and how it's happening. And people were talking about this years ago, but all of a sudden it's here. So it's great to see. Hey, the trailer is here. We're going to run it from July 21st to August 14th in Durham region here. We're happy to host it at Oshawa Power, and Durham region is sponsoring it. And you folks are here with 4 different makes and models. I mean, from your perspective in running this roadshow, this one came at the heels of you guys being out in New Brunswick.
Right.
You're right across Canada. What are you hearing at these? I know. What are you guys hearing at these things? What's the most common questions you're getting?
So people are still concerned about price. I mean, price has always been a factor. And what we really have to help people understand is sort of that concept of pay now, but save later, which not everyone can do, right? I mean, the vehicles still are a little bit more expensive up front. But we know, especially with the current price of gas, that electricity is running at about 1/6 the price of gas. And so, when the average consumer is paying almost $2 a liter, us EV drivers, we're paying about the equivalent of 30 cents a liter. And so over time, you are going to save. It's just a matter of doing some math. And honestly, what we have found is consumers don't do math before they buy a car. That isn't something they had typically thought about. So this is something that we have to still spend some time on. And then, of course, just figuring out which vehicle is available, which vehicle suits their budget. And I would say the environmental benefits, of course, it's a big plus, but it sort of comes after price and range. People are very happy to do something good for the environment, but it's usually not the driving factor.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I love the way you characterized it. I mean, we're all vehicle buyers, right? And certainly prices that, the sticker
For
on the
sure.
window is the one sort of, you know element. After you fall in love with the make and the model, you kind of look at the number and you go, well, what can I do to tweak that number? But certainly on the EV side, there's some different pieces that factor into it, and certainly it's not the acquisition price, but the total ownership cost, as they say in the
Exactly.
in the
And we
world.
have this amazing tool on our website called Find Your EV Match. And you can enter in your current vehicle, your gas car, every make and model is in there, no matter how old, and compare it to any EV on the market that you're interested in. And it will produce a graph for you of your monthly savings. And you can see based on your own driving patterns when you're going to hit that sweet spot where you've kind of paid off any upfront higher price you might have paid and you're sort of in the money.
That's a
And
great
so
tool.
it's really helpful to people to kind of really, because sometimes people just don't believe it that they're going to save that much money. And those of us who drive EVs, we know it's true, but it takes some convincing still.
Well, and if you hang on to it, for that crossover point, you go, okay, from here on in, I'm saving
It's
total money, right?
basically free.
Yeah,
And of
exactly.
course,
I love that thinking.
yeah,
Hey,
and of course, you have to remember too that the maintenance on these vehicles is extremely low. Now, the oldest EV, as we were just talking about, is about 11, 12 years old, the Nissan Leaf, uh, maybe a Mitsubishi i-MiEV. And so we don't have tons of data, but what we are seeing based on the oldest cars is that the maintenance is so much less than a gas car based on the fact that there are so few moving parts. There's just like about 20 to 30 moving parts in a gas car and about 2000, in an EV, and about 2000 in a gas car. And so, that's just what breaks. That's just what breaks. And so, we're seeing extremely low maintenance costs, and that doesn't even get factored into the savings most of the time.
hey, as an electrical engineer, it makes me really proud to say, hey, we got it at 30 moving parts, versus the
Yeah,
mechanical engineers for
right.
the
I
ice
mean, it's a
vehicles.
it's a bargain. I mean, I like to tell the little anecdote. I bought a 2011 Nissan Leaf. I was one of those first Leaf buyers, and I owned it for 7 years before I sold it and upgraded to a bigger battery car. And those first 6 years, I changed my wiper blades.
Very
That was
good.
it. That was it.
Hey, and speaking of the acquisition costs, it's kind of interesting. So here we are. You talk about a vehicle you bought like 11 years ago and went into another vehicle. Like the lifespan of these vehicles are certainly long enough where you've got second lives out of these things. In that used vehicle space, I know you guys were thinking of that as your strategy in plug and drive. How has that evolved, and what are you seeing in that market space in terms of, hey, as first generation owners are moving up in scale, is
Right.
there a value for a first time buyer to buy a used vehicle and then slowly get in there to help with the acquisition cost issue?
Yes, I mean, the used vehicle market kind of went nuts in the last year and the prices really went up. Prior to that, actually a used EV was a real bargain. I do believe it will come back down again. We are seeing in the States, used prices are starting to come down. So I think we will see that. But there is availability, which is key right now, where there's not a lot of availability in the new market. And the great thing we're seeing too is there's been lots of studies on the batteries, and these cars, it looks like the battery will outlast the car. So the primary concern we were hearing from people about buying a used EV is like, oh, well, what if the battery dies and then I'm going to have to replace this battery and the battery is going to be the most expensive component. But what we're seeing is nobody is replacing the batteries. They're lasting 12 to 15 years. The automakers are putting 8 to 10 year warranties on the battery, depending on the make and model. And so most Canadians are only keeping their cars that long. So for the most part, people are covered, and that's giving them some comfort that they can do it with the used EV and that they're not going to have this giant cost, to replace a battery.
And that's a great opportunity. I love how the market's evolving there, and it certainly speaks to people who maybe can't do the upfront acquisition and want
Right.
a leaner vehicle, something that isn't a bit fancy, and are prepared to take a first generation EV and at a lower sticker shock
A
price. That'd
hundred
be great.
percent. And
Yeah.
we're seeing now lease and loan options, more different options available for the used EV, which, in the past, it was harder to finance a used car. It was harder to get a lease. And now there's a lot more of these options available. And so I think a lease or loan on an EV makes a lot of sense, because then you're not going to get that upfront sticker price shock. The little bit more you pay for an EV gets amortized over the life of it, and you actually are doing the savings, each month. So you're kind of saving as you pay,
Yeah.
which I think is better for a lot of Canadians.
And that's great. So it kind of opens the door to the types of incentives. I know there's a few incentives out there. Like,
Sure.
from your perspective, what are the incentives, and do you
Sure.
think anything else is coming down the pipe? Because transport is our biggest opportunity for, carbon reductions.
You're right. Well, there's a couple of things in place and a couple of things coming. And of course, we can all, bug our local MPPs to do more. But what we are seeing, of course, we still have the $5,000 rebate. That's a federal rebate. That still applies in Ontario, and they've just renewed it. So that's good to go for quite a while. Now there are some restrictions on that in terms of caps on prices and things like that. So you do have to check out the federal government website, which is under zero emission vehicles. That's where you find it, on the NRCan website. And so that's $5,000, which makes quite a big difference in that upfront differential. And then the Ontario government did announce just prior to the election that they were going to bring in this ultra low nighttime electricity price. And I do believe that's a go, since they did get reelected. And so that does mean that your nighttime charging cost is going to go down even more. And so we are going to see, even lower total cost of ownership.
Yeah, and so that sort of opens the door. Like, in my business, we're the electric grid, and we produce electrons, but OPG does most of the production in Ontario. I mean, we were always talking about trying to balance out the shape of the load curve electrically.
Exactly.
And from your perspective, there's a bunch of infrastructure issues that we're all trying to address.
Sure.
Some in different ways, whether it's the charging infrastructure, the grid upgrade, or the pricing, the time of use pricing side of it. What are you seeing as opportunities on these issues that you see out there?
Well, the dropping the nighttime price is something you and I and many others have been advocating for a long time. So that is a really good move. I was very happy to see that happen. It will help, increase the load in the middle of the night when we have, very low demand. So that's great. I do think, there's more to be done. Where I see the need the most for infrastructure myself, I know a lot of people are very fixated on public charging. The reality is 80% of us charge at home at night, and that's where people prefer to charge. It's the cheapest, it's the most convenient. The challenge is multi-unit. If you live in a single family home, it's pretty easy. If you live in multi-unit, it can be a real challenge, especially in an older building where, putting in that infrastructure is going to be very expensive. So I really like the idea, if a government is going to fund infrastructure, that they should put their money there more than in public places where others actually, I think, will do it anyway. And so I don't think it needs government funding quite as much.
And it's interesting because I think the regulations on the building code are sort of mandating that new buildings in multi-res locations have to be, I don't know, primed or ready for EV connections, which is one move. I mean, that's a good start.
Well,
but to your
this
point,
is actually
the retrofit,
not fully in the books at this time. It's been mandated on commercial, but not residential yet.
Right.
And we did have it at one time. It got killed by the Ford government. I think they're rethinking that.
Good.
And so that's something I think we can advocate for, and I think we'll succeed, to have a change in the building code. And for example, like Toronto Green Standard and other municipalities have already mandated it in their municipality, but it's not actually in the building code that it requires, every new building to at least rough in for, you name the percent. I personally think the rough in should be 100%, and then the installation can be done over time. It doesn't have to be, they don't have to install any at the start. They can install 10 and then 20, just the rough in so that, the building is EV ready.
Yeah, and again, the readiness part is the most important
Of
because, like you
course.
said, you could feather it in and do
Yeah,
it later because a building's expected to last 100 years, right?
exactly. Like
Retrofit is more expensive
it
sometimes when you
seems
come
like a
back.
very bad business decision not to plan for this at this time when we
Yeah,
all know where this is going.
cool. Hey, one last question. So, the trend of businesses, we're talking about commercial establishments and operations. I mean, I'm hearing ESG at the forefront of a lot of languages on businesses and people trying to be, trying to adopt a more ESG approach to life in terms of how they run their business and their communities. And so, with transport the way it is and its carbon footprint, what are you seeing in terms of the business drivers of people sort of adopting EVs and moving towards that trend because of ESG?
Certainly, we're seeing a lot of companies looking at their fleet as an easy win. It's an easier opportunity to reduce emissions. And of course, nobody flips their fleet over in 1 year. It's a 7 to 10 year, every year a certain number of vehicles come up for replacement. And so it's a nice way for a lot of companies to say, hey, okay, every year we're going to look at what vehicles are coming up to be replaced and try to replace those with the most environmentally friendly option. It's not always possible to replace them with a fully electric. Sometimes it's a plug-in hybrid or even a hybrid, but people are doing the analysis. And this is something that where we can help folks direct them to the resources. There are a lot of amazing resources out there to help EV fleets. And we're seeing actually a lot in Durham region. I know like the municipalities in Pickering and Ajax, they're all looking at electrifying their fleets. Oshawa, all these places are starting to look at their fleets as a quick win. I would say it's easier than a lot of other things to tackle.
And that's great. Well, Cara, I want to thank you for taking the time to sort of do a chin wag with us on the
No
issue of
problem.
plug and drive and EVs in Durham. And folks, if you're a commercial establishment or a residential establishment and you're looking to drive or test drive an EV or look for incentives or get more information, Plug and Drive is here in Durham region at Oshawa Power's headquarters. We're happy to sponsor it between July 21st and August 14th, and you'll see the Plug and Drive trailer that Cara's team has got out there. So we welcome you to join us and enjoy what Plug and Drive has to offer. Cara, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Ivano. Thanks for having me.
You take care.
You too.
Thanks, Cara.
Bye-bye.